Hello, my name is Jeff Beaudry, and I'm an associate professor in the Education Leadership Program at the University of Southern Maine.
And I'm Anita Stewart McCafferty, an assistant professor in Ed Leadership here at USM as well.
We'd like to introduce you to this video with our very special guest, Rick Stiggins, who is the former president of the Assessment Training Institute and who has authored so many wonderful books, but the most recent is Defensible Teacher Evaluation, which is the topic of this particular video.
Rick was a guest in our classroom, and he spoke to us specifically about the importance of assessment literacy within our schools and leaders taking a direct responsibility for that. Also looking at the role of classroom assessment within the concept of student growth and how that will be measured. While it's a national conversation that's going on, it's very near and dear to us here in Maine as a new piece of legislation, the Effective Educator Law, has rolled out, and people are trying to figure out the placement of classroom assessment within the student growth models.
We were so pleased to have Rick as a part of our graduate course in the analysis of teaching and assessment. But we're also seeing this as something that could connect more broadly with professional development. So I want you to think, as you look at the presentation and listen to the presentation that Rick makes, directly following that, there was an even longer period of interaction between the teachers, the participants, and Rick, probing very important questions around defensible teacher evaluation. So we hope this video will help you go down the same pathway as well. Really great. Thank you, Rick, for taking the time out of your day. I wanted to welcome you to our class, and we can do some I think, introductions at a certain point, but my co-teacher, Anita Stewart McCafferty, is also, I don't know if you're on the, I don't know if you're on this thing.
No, I'm not. I closed out.
Okay, so she closed out. So here's Anita.
Hi, Rick.
Hi, Anita.
Hi. Huge fan of your work.
Oh, thanks.
I won't call you Billy Joel or something, but blessings.
Thank you. And, can you? I want to first of all say it's an honor to be invited back to Portland. Jeff may have told you that a few years ago, my wife Nancy and I came to Portland, and I was a Libra scholar there for a semester, and we loved it. We rented a house on Old Orchard Beach that was way too funky. It took us back to our hippie days, but it was great fun because it was right on the beach, and we had a great time and getting to hang out with all you guys and Jeff and the faculty and his family and his lovely family. It was all great fun. So it's nice to be kind of back again, at least in electrons. My understanding is that you all are headed toward, ultimately, hopefully, toward leadership responsibilities in schools, and you're teaching now and wanting to continue to grow in our profession. And I thank you for that, and thank you for all that you do for the kidlets as your teachers now, and for the young people as you're teaching now. This is, to my knowledge, the first time a course like this has been structured around the combination of ideas that has to do with teacher evaluation. And I'd like to sort of expand that. That is the evaluation of the impact of our instruction on students as individual teachers, considering evidence of student growth as part of that evaluation process that relies on the classroom level of assessment. The combination of teacher evaluation and student achievement growth is, I think, a powerful idea. I have contended throughout my career that the impact of our instruction on student learning is a legitimate factor in the evaluation of our performance as professional educators. It's the job we're hired to do. And what Jeff has done and Anita have done is to wade into that idea and use it as a vehicle for learning about, discussing, and thinking about matters of quality classroom assessment. I applaud that. When you get a chance to read more of the, Jeff shared with you a chapter from the teacher evaluation book, teacher evaluation, defensible teacher evaluation. When you get a chance to read that, I think you'll find the book, especially from a leadership point of view, to be compelling, because what's happening across the country is that literally state legislatures under the watchful eye of the U.S. Department of Education are literally mandating that student growth be defined as year-to-year change in annual standardized test scores. And I've written extensively in the book about how that is patently indefensible as a source of evidence of student growth. There are a wide variety of reasons that have to do with the tests themselves, factors in the tests themselves, factors related to the annual year-long pre-test, post-test time span. And then lots of people are mandating reliance on value-added statistical analysis to define student growth, which is in and of itself been discredited almost universally in the statistics community. So there are lots of reasons why that whole standardized test thing just can't work. But that having been said, I believe deeply that evidence gathered in the day-to-day classroom assessment process could serve in a summative teacher evaluation process, and I describe how in the book, and you got to see part of that. And furthermore, even if we're not talking about evaluating our performance in a summative context, if as educators we wish to improve what we're doing just from a formative assessment point of view, looking carefully at evidence of our impact on student achievement as we conduct the action research that is our classrooms, is a powerful way to see how to get better. And so reliance on evidence from classroom assessment on a pre-test, post-test basis can be powerful in that regard also. What you read about in your chapter 6, if you had a chance to read it, really centers on what I believe to be, have developed over the years to mean in our work at a Assessment Training Institute, the keys to quality assessment. They are universal, and they're not negotiable. And what we contend basically is that to conduct a quality assessment, hey, hi, welcome. How are you? Trying to be unobtrusive. We saw you. Anyway, we want to start with a clear purpose. That is a clear sense of the information needs of the intended user. And what I mean by that is, if assessment is about gathering information to inform instructional decisions, then in any particular assessment context, the key question is what decision hangs in the balance? And then, who's going to make the decision? And what information do they need? Because if you don't have answers to those questions, there's no way to design and develop an assessment to serve those information needs. So a clear sense of the information needs of the user. You know, in the teacher evaluation context, if it's summative, then one must provide evidence of impact to one's supervisor. It's often the case that that's being translated into the law also, and as part of this. But what I want people to understand is that summative teacher evaluation context is just one of many. And I want to refer you, if you happen to have your Chapter 6 copy there with you, to that table that is in Chapter 6 on pages, hang on, I got to just look quick. It's Table 10, pages 102 and 103. I'm saying to you that table is central to understanding this matter of starting any assessment event with a clear sense of purpose. What this table says in very specific terms is that different people need different information in different forms at different times to do their jobs. And if we don't build our assessment systems around meeting all of the important information needs, then we're going to have systems that have what they've been for 70 years, instructionally challenged. They're not going to have much instructional impact. So what I want you to understand is that this issue of summative teacher evaluation, as it's playing out across the country, it fits into this framework, but as one of many applications of assessment where we use information to inform decisions at a wide variety of different levels. So I want you to keep that perspective. The second key to quality, as you read in the chapter, is this matter of clear targets. And our basic assessment literacy point here is we can't develop assessment exercises and scoring schemes for learning targets we've not clearly, completely, and appropriately defined. And so we call the clear target the foundation of an assessment. You start there, and from there you build an assessment. If that's not there, there's not going to be any assessment. And in this case, in the teacher evaluation context, what I'm contending ought to be common practice is that a teacher and their supervisor should sit down in advance and identify the teacher's highest priority learning targets, highest priority achievement standards in one or so in each subject that they teach. And those are what should be the focus of the gathering of evidence to inform the teacher evaluation decision. That is the efficacy of your instruction. So in the Indefensible book, I talk about why I think that's why that's a priority. But in any event, from a quality assessment point of view, regardless of the decision context, got to be clear targets, got to be clear and appropriate targets. And we talk a lot about that in our professional development in the realm of classroom assessment. And then, and here's how the convergence happens. Once we have a clear purpose, that is, we know what kind of information we need to inform who, for what reason, and we have a clear target. Now we have the key elements of an assessment context clearly defined. And what we need to do is to build a quality assessment to fit into that context, to provide the needed information about the learning target in question or targets in question to the priority decision maker. And so that brings us then to the matter of quality assessment. And this is universally essential, and it's something that has not been given strong attention in American education literally for decades. We know what it means to create quality assessments. We know how to help people learn to do that, and you're going to delve deeply, or you're already delving deeply into that in this course. Our contention basically is that if you're going to build a quality assessment for any context, you got to start with a proper assessment method, a proper sampling plan, build it out of high quality ingredients, and anticipate whatever sources of bias can distort results and try to the best of your ability to eliminate them. Those are the 4 keys to quality, and you're going to spend more time talking about those. So, and then once I have the assessment in place, essentially what we're saying in the teacher evaluation context about matters of assessment quality is that by and large, annual standardized tests will not provide quality evidence of the key learning targets in a particular or individual teacher's learning instructional responsibilities. There are a wide variety of reasons for that, and you can read about those in the book if you want to. So this is the matter of assessment quality is the very reason why I advocate for reliance on classroom assessment, because you and your colleagues can be in control of creating the highest quality evidence available of the impact of your instruction. But that requires that the focus of assessment be on the learning targets that are your individual high priority instructional responsibilities. That's where high quality assessment is just essential. And then once we have those results from that assessment, then we need to communicate the results effectively. What I want people to understand about communicating assessment results is that communication is only going to be as good as a sense of the information needs of the intended user and the quality of the evidence that's gathered. If we don't have a sense of the decision maker's information needs, then we can't deliver the information they need. At some point, that's sort of, I guess, obvious, but it's worth verbalizing, because I think it's critical. And if the quality of the evidence we gather is shoddy, then miscommunication about student achievement is literally assured, and that's not okay. So effective communication turns out to be a critical attribute of good assessment also. In the teacher evaluation context, what I'm advocating is the accumulation of evidence of student mastery, pre-test, post-test evidence of student mastery of your highest priority learning targets, achievement standards, gathered over time during a period of instruction and compiled into a portfolio, which across the high priority achievement targets will define or provide evidence of the efficacy of your instructional interventions, and that you should be given the opportunity to present that portfolio to your supervisor, along with a statement about any factors that were beyond your control that may have positively or negatively impacted student achievement, so that those can be taken into account too in the interpretation of those results. So what it all comes down to for me is, if we're going to use student growth in teacher evaluation, which is a really good idea, I believe, or if we need quality evidence of student achievement for any other instructional decision, we got to know what the learning target is, we got to create quality assessments, we got to communicate effectively. And all of that turns out to be critically important. Now, I might just add, and that's what I describe, all of that in the particular teacher evaluation context is what I describe here. But I want you to understand that this generalizes across your entire assessment world. And so these things are universally important. I might also just add that you may know, you guys may have already talked about this, that there's a fifth key to quality classroom assessment that we advocate in our work through the Assessment Training Institute, and that is we advocate deep student involvement in the assessment process during their learning as an instructional intervention. Now, that has nothing to do with the teacher evaluation context at all. This is about teaching and learning, because it turns out that there are a wide variety of really productive ways to bring students into the assessment process while they're learning in ways that keep them believing in themselves and keep them striving for excellence. And we can talk about that too if you want. So, Jeff, and Anita, these are the opening comments that I had planned. We can open the floor now, or if you guys want to say something about all of this or ask questions about any of it, let's just talk about all this stuff. Okay?
Sure. Thank you, Rick. Gathered some information in a Google Doc, shared, based on your readings, based on that defensible teacher evaluation. So there are a couple of questions we could use to just kind of prime the pump here. I know it'll take probably nothing to get people to jump in here, but let me just refer to the questions that they took the time to write to us, okay?
Yeah.
And so then we can kind of, go in and out. But I do appreciate that you see this really as a good fit, the assessment literacy and the teacher evaluation as a good fit, because sure. I think we're really seeing it as the same. What we want to try to do is to keep the integrity of the two of them so that they don't get to be too cumbersome or get to be bogged down in the whole infrastructure, the expectations of infrastructure and so forth. So let me just ask a couple of questions then.
Okay.
So I think one of the questions that we had here that was very compelling had to do with the use of assessments and English language learners, alternative language. We have quite a large population of refugees and resettlements here, especially in southern Maine, but I'm sure this is something that's important around the country. So there was something that you mentioned in your book that said that the extended written response really wasn't as good a match for that. So would you speak to the English language learners and how you see them fitting into this mix?
Sure. This is a matter that we can address not specifically in the teacher evaluation context, but generally from a matter of assessment quality. By and large, our assessment practices are language-based practices. So there's always the danger that we can, this is a source of bias. I was talking about those sources of bias earlier. We can assume, or at least be alerted to the fact that if there's a language that the student is familiar with is not a language and uses, it's not our language, English, for example, then there's the danger that because of our inability to communicate with each other, that the student may in fact be a master of the learning target in question, but we don't know it and can't know it. Now, the only, as painful as this sounds, the only solution to that problem is to be able to communicate in the same language.
Okay.
And the way that we can do that certainly is to have an English language development program so that we can get on the same wavelength, or have translators available. If those aren't available, if neither of those are available and we can't communicate, then I think quality assessment is beyond reach until we find a way to communicate effectively with the same language.
All right. So another, I think, what you said earlier about the development of leaders, and what we're doing in this program is really important. And of course, a lot of discussion takes place around leadership and assessment literacy. So I wanted to just ask, and then we'll have Anita ask some follow-up questions here. If we're looking for leadership to take a strong role in this, what are some of the things that you can do? What are the first steps a school district or a school can take for professional development to help remedy this?
Right. Incidentally, I think it's instructive to know that having an assessment component like this, a leadership preparation program, as the folks at University of Miami do, is also it's still unprecedented, it's still very rare in the United States. It is the case that a relevant, helpful assessment training remains almost non-existent in pre-service leadership preparation programs across the United States today. This is in the year 2014. How anybody can justify that is just beyond me in these assessment times. So you're getting a really great benefit in the program to have this component in there. Now, what we need to do is to do, from a leadership point of view, is first of all, at the local district levels, not operate on the assumption that people are assessment illiterate. Don't just assume it. That is, that they don't understand the principles of sound assessment. Rather, the thing to do would be to check it out and try to determine the level of assessment literacy among the faculty and leaders within the district, and then respond to the results. I know that Jeff, you guys have a pre-assessment. Well, you guys are using the pre-assessment in the course, aren't you?
Yes.
It's a pretty big one, pretty comprehensive. But maybe there would be may need to be a more efficient, shorter version of it. Maybe you could do a compacted version of it. But something like that to find out the current state of affairs would be a good thing to do. Now, I think you know as well as I do that you can probably anticipate the results to a very high degree of accuracy. But it's important, nevertheless, to check and see and to have everybody to be involved in that. And then, if you find that there is work to be done, then there are programs and training programs and materials that's readily available to help with the classroom level of assessment literacy and leadership assessment literacy. And I don't want to go into a lot of detail about those. Incidentally, I'm no longer actually officially or in any business sense affiliated with the Assessment Training Institute any longer. I have retired, so welcome to my retirement. And so I have no financial interest in any of that. But those programs are available through the Assessment Training Institute, and they're learning team-based programs. There's actually also in the action guide for school leaders. There's a guide that would allow a district to do a very thoughtful self-analysis of the extent to which keys to quality assessment are in place in the district or not. And so that self-analysis would be a really productive thing to do. There's an action guide for school leaders available on the ATI website. And so, you know, evaluating the current state of organizational affairs and individual teachers' assessment literacy would be a great place to start. And then, if you find the results suggesting a need for professional development, it's readily available. And it's a learning team-based program, not trainer-dependent. And people can go on internal control and go step by step as a learning team, as a learning community, to develop that assessment literacy. Yep.
Okay, well, as a follow-up then, I think what's happened in many cases is that while we are listening to our leaders in school districts, we're finding out, and people are saying here, that they're really not getting very good information. In fact, they're getting forced into programs and into practices that they know are going to be difficult, that are going to lead to some you know, issues, disasters, call them what you will, like using Atlas Rubicon or using, you name it, using Power School to run the world, you know, or to do all the things that maybe it should do, but maybe beyond. So what should we do in that case? How do people take a...
Here's the deal. This is a big problem for us. I just published this month in the Phi Delta Kappa an article called Building Assessment Literacy Beyond the School Too, or something to that effect. And what's happening is people at the highest level of policy, all the way to the federal U.S. Department of Education, are setting assessment policy from a perspective of a lack of assessment literacy. That is, people really are setting policy who don't know what they're doing from an assessment point of view. And it's happening in state legislatures and state departments of education all across the country. Now, I don't mean to personalize this or be prejudiced about this with regard to what's going on in Maine, because I don't know. But the article articulates specific standards of assessment literacy that we need to develop in non-educator policymakers also, as well as in our parent and grandparent community, taxpayer community, and furthermore, it includes the advocacy of developing assessment literacy in students. And as a matter of fact, it includes something that I call my student bill of assessment right, in which we articulate up front what students are entitlements that accrue to students that must be adhered to, and they're not negotiable. And so what I'm saying is it's time to begin to advocate for assessment literacy among policymakers too, because what's happening across the country is a disaster from an assessment policy point of view.
Rick, this is
October Phi Delta Kappa. Take a look.
Yeah,
okay.
We'll check that out for sure. Rick, as a person that is just coming from the middle school world into the university setting within the last 2 years, I just want you to know that I've had great success with using the learning team approach, using your materials and the Assessment Institute training guides. That's been really helpful and something that I've invested a lot of time in, really believing that assessment literacy is important.
Good.
Could we talk about what my fear is and my sense of kind of the rush, the timeline that we have here in Maine, just to, I'm not sure how much you know about it, but people are supposed to be piloting this teacher evaluation system, which is based on student growth this year, and fully implementing it by next September. And the guidance document, the rules from the legislature just came out in August, were finalized in August. So the timeline is making people just absolutely crazy.
It's another example of policy based on a fundamental misunderstanding of the current state of affairs in American education, in this case, Maine schools. They're operating on the assumption that everybody knows exactly what they're doing from an assessment point of view, and all they need to do is to pour that wisdom into this particular application, and it's simply not true. And that's what's driving people crazy. So now what has to happen is that somebody has to speak truth to power about this. about the current state of affairs. In Oregon, we're facing the same thing in Oregon, and we've not yet escaped in Oregon the demand for reliance on standardized test scores where they're available. We're still fighting that one. But what we did here was to launch a statewide professional development program and get it out as fast as we could, so people would at least have some tools to work with. And it just seems to me that if somehow you could get word, people at the highest level of policy, that is the Department of Education and legislators, that foundation of assessment literacy is not there, if it's not, and that they got to do something about that, then I think there's going to be an awful lot of damage done. I mean, an awful lot of damage done. And you might get copies of that defensible teacher evaluation book in their hands so they can begin to understand the current state of affairs. And incidentally, I need to tell you that I'm pushing that book and then another one called Revolutionize Assessment, which are new publications for me. Not because I'm pushing for royalties. All of the royalties from the sale of those two books go to Michigan State University in an endowment that has as its mission to improve service preparation for teachers and school leaders in assessment. So I have no personal gain from this at all. That book needs to get circulated, and people need to read it, and we need to kick some serious butt about this stuff, because a lot of kids are going to get hurt really, really badly from this, and a lot of teachers are going to be mislabeled either as productive, as high-quality teachers, or poor quality, and it's not going to be fair. It's not going to be a high-quality decision. And I can't state that more passionately. It's not okay what's going on in Maine or in Oregon. And we, the educators, have got to stand. In Oregon, we've formed a committee, far-reaching committee, to put together a new vision of excellence for Oregon schools because of what's going on. This is craziness. And that's going to be presented to the governor in January. And it's going to the legislature. And, you know, we're trying for all we're worth. And you all need to do the same thing, to raise some hell and tell people that this is not going to play out productively unless and until we get that foundation of understanding of the principles of sound assessment in place. That's the key. And without it, it's just not going to be a happy world. It's going to be bad, 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 bad. And if you need for me to tell them that, link us up, and I'll tell them.
I can see that where the links are coming out
that's
here.
That's right, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate that, because it is a timeline issue, and it's also a prerequisite skill. Like you spoke about it very clearly. It's the assumption that we all have these skills sitting in our pockets and we're using them, and now it's just pouring it in to this system, or whether it be pouring it into proficiency-based diplomas for kids.
Yeah, and can't you see how kind of painful this is for us to go to our communities and say, look, you may have thought we knew what we were doing from an assessment point of view, but you know, we really aren't trained to do that because we've always operated on the assumption that the annual standardized test would serve all needs. Well, they never did, and they never will, and we don't have the foundation, and as uncomfortable as we are to admit it, that's what's the state of affairs. Now, let's get to work on that problem, and then we'll move forward on the other one. And I think we can. What's really important is not for us not to appear to be being defensive about the student growth thing. We welcome it. But we can only do that if we have the tools to do it right. And grasping at straws, as many state legislatures are doing by saying, well, just change the annual standardized test scores, once again revealing they have no idea what the hell they're doing, is not acceptable. Is not an acceptable solution. And it can't be allowed to play out. It just doesn't work. It can't. And so let's do it right. If we're going to do it, let's do it right. And I think we should, and I think we can.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna start to aim the microphone around the room, and we have some students and some teachers and some passionate learners who would like to ask you some questions here.
Sure. Let's go.
Right,
Hi,
so
guys.
Just introduce yourself and ask your question if you would.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
So I'm really very interested in what you just said, because right now we have a situation at our school where I'm I'm hearing from some of our best teachers feeling extremely frustrated and disenfranchised in this process, sort of being thrust upon them without the consensus building and without what you're, like you're saying, the foundation of assessment literacy. What I want to clarify is you said someone needs to speak truth to power. So what I'm asking you is, are you saying sort of, okay, for an example, take a building, those teachers coming together and maybe talking to the state or talking to the school administration? Like literally which is a better approach first?
The first approach is that somebody's got to approach, it's got to get with the policy level decision makers and begin their education. Begin helping them understand the basic principles of sound assessment. For example, get some copies of that Kaplan article and get it into the hands of legislators. What we have to understand is that people in local leadership positions are trapped between a rock and a hard place here. They have policies coming down that they have to implement that they know are indefensible. And then teachers, on the other hand, if we just come to them and say, but we know they're indefensible too, and why are you doing this? Well, they're doing it because it's being demanded of them. And you know, in lots of states, I don't know if this is true in Maine, but it was true in Oregon, there's a lot of federal money hanging in the balance, and you can't just pass on the federal money because I know it sounds a lot like blackmail, but it's important to begin the education process of the policymakers. Now, to the extent that we can help build the assessment literacy of local school district administrators so they can articulate these to legislators, that's a good idea. It's a leadership issue. It's not a classroom issue. Somebody's got to suspend this thing and take time to understand it. Just moving forward blindly, it's like the blind leading the super blind. Go ahead.
No, the second part of the question was you wrote, page 106, you said, teachers and other educators need an opportunity to become assessment literate. And what I immediately wrote there was actual time and place. Where and when does this occur? Are the other questions that I have for leadership.
The resources need to be allocated for this. This is my position. And I'm saying to policymakers, this foundation is not in place, and resource allocators, this foundation is not in place. The consequences of that are dire. Either allocate time and place for that assessment literacy to develop, or shut the hell up about student growth and teacher evaluation. That's it. I'm saying there's no choice here. You either give people the tools to do this job or shut the hell up about it and stop trying to pursue the idea. And you can tell them I said that.
I'm going to, actually, tomorrow.
Good. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Rick, just to follow up with that, it's interesting that in the ISLIC standards, which I know we use here in Maine, to be able to license our building level administrators as well as our central office administrators, it's almost assessment is almost non-existent in the current use, and that's the foundation not only for certification but for all of the programs, master's degrees and CAS. I know the new authorization, I think that's coming up out here soon of the ISLIC standards, assessment plays a much greater role, but I think that there are responsibilities for at that level as well, because so much of our licenses are and certifications depending on that.
Shared responsibilities all over the place here. There certainly is a need for help for those currently practicing in the classroom and in building offices and district offices. They need help. But in addition to that, licensing and certification standards and exams need to reflect a foundation, require a foundation of assessment literacy to define in practical terms. And in addition to that, colleges of teacher education and leadership training programs need to help us bring new people into the profession with that foundation of assessment literacy already in place. And that's a huge challenge across the country. Not everybody is like University of Southern Maine here. here. It's still the case that that training is almost absent in as many programs as it's present for teachers and for leaders. As I said before, it remains non-existent. So, and put yourself in the place of people who are in district leadership. They can't address the issues of assessment literacy because they've not been trained to do it, and they're somehow charged with responsibility for convincing legislators that this is that they don't. It can't work. It can't work in its current form. Can't happen. We need to change at a lot of different levels, but we know how to do that. Here's the deal. We know what people need to know and be able to do. There is no question about that. We know how to help them to master those professional proficiencies in very efficient and very effective ways. The only thing that's missing, back to the first person that spoke there from the other side, all that's missing is the opportunity to learn. And if that continue to have problems. The only thing missing is the opportunity to learn, and we got to allocate that. And it's a priority. It has to be a priority.
Great, thank you.
Great. Well, let's see if we have some other. I'm going to wait to see if we have some other questions here.
Sure.
Anyone else like it? Come on, guys. Come on. This is your chance to ask the assessment guy from the West Coast who is begging to hear your question. So anything practical, anything classroom, please.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be teacher evaluation. Anything about assessment that you want to ask is fine.
Hey Rick, I'm Nancy Dwyer. I'm a special ed teacher, particularly working with kids with behavior issues who are pretty indifferent to being in a classroom, much less taking assessments. But you gave some great examples of instructional actions too, and I love what you said about getting students on winning streaks and keeping them there, and just wonderful ways to gain behavioral momentum. Have you developed, or can you recommend other sources for tools? You had mentioned student-friendly versions of the achievement targets, ways to access descriptive feedback, ways students can self-assess, and key attributes of success within student work.
Right. Yes. What we've been exploring in my work for the last probably 20 or 30 years is a dimension of the assessment experience that the measurement community has essentially neglected, and that is the emotional dynamics of being evaluated, and we need to understand those from the student's point of view. And what that means is that what we have to understand is we've operated for a long time on the belief that assessment is something that adults do to students. What we have failed to realize is that students are evaluating their own performance too, continuously. They're reading the evidence we give them, and they're drawing inference. They are critical data-based instructional decision makers too. And they make critical decisions based on their interpretation of the results. So and the thing is, they get to make their decisions first. So they look at their results and they can say, if they respond productively, what they say is, when we brought them to a place where they can respond productively to assessment results and to make decisions, the productive response is, I understand these results, I know what comes next in my learning, I know what to do next, I choose to keep trying. That's what happens to kids who are on winning streaks. Counterproductive response to assessment results leave kids seeing them and saying, wow, I have no idea what these results mean, or I have no idea what to do about them. I'm too dumb to learn this anyway. I quit. See, what happens is, if they make the first decision that they're not going to succeed here, then do y'all understand that it doesn't matter what you decide with your highfalutin data management systems and sophisticated assessments? They just quit before we ever got into the game. And so this whole idea of assessment for learning is about, oh, hang on a second, is about keeping kids on winning streaks and keeping them believing that success is within reach. And the way we do that is we teach them, we start instruction with student-friendly versions of the learning targets, operating on the belief that kids can hit any target that they can see and that holds still for them. But if they're guessing at what the target is, success becomes a random event. And then, so we understand that they're going to make some decisions. We understand that they need to understand the learning target, and understand all this happens during the learning. While this is going on, the grade book is closed. This is formative. This is not summative. It has nothing to do with the grading process. It has to do with learning. And then what we recommend is that we engage students in an ongoing as they ascend the scaffolding leading up to the place where they judge that they're competent, and we would agree with them. And we can do that by conducting continuous self-assessments, engaging students in self-assessments. Now remember, those have to be high-quality assessments, so the same standards of assessment quality come into play. And so what we do is we might, for example, engage them as partner in the practice of developing practice versions of assessments like those that they're going to be held accountable for down the road, so that they get experience in seeing how they're going to be evaluated and in watching themselves grow. In this case, winning streaks doesn't mean winning games. It means hitting consecutive learning targets successfully, so that what grows in them is that sense of confidence that I'm not there yet, but I'm going to get there. If I keep trying at this level, that is, I'm going to succeed. That's the effect of the winning streak. And then we want to teach them to constantly be communicating with each other and with their parents and others and their teacher about where they are in the learning progression, so that what's happening is they're sharing and interpreting and discussing their assessment results as they go, as they grow. And the culmination of this, well, it's one of many culminations, but the one that's most graphic for me is that when a student has succeeded in hitting a variety of learning targets, is the idea of a student-led parent-teacher conference in which the student has their portfolio, their growth portfolio. And they can sit with their parents and go through the progression of learning that they ascended, saying, look, here's a sample of my work early on. Notice this about it. Now look later on. Notice that problem's been resolved because my work has ascended to a new level. So watching kids do that and watching their parents react to it is just quite compelling, quite emotional and moving, as it turns out, for parents. But the whole idea is to bring students inside the tent where the secrets to their success reside and have them watch themselves growing. That's what I'm talking about. And the resource for learning about that is the ATI guide called For Student Learning, Doing It Right, Using It Well. It's a basic in-service teacher training manual for learning to do those things. And that's the learning team-based program.
Okay, here, got someone right over here, Rick. Bonnie is coming over.
Hi, Bonnie.
How are you? I have a question, just actually listening to you, and I'm also a special ed teacher. However, I always make rubrics that kind of go along with the actual student. So I have like diverse students on different levels doing almost the same assignment, but I've got rubrics that are different for each one of them, which works, because you know, if you've got a child who is putting in all the effort and they're still not making that standard, it works for them. But the problem is these students who are doing better work are seeing that these other students are getting almost the same grade, and then I'm also putting it into a grade book, and I guess what I'm asking is, should I be doing this where they're not actually meeting the standard? I'm putting it in the grade book as they are.
What you have uncovered is the fundamental flaw with report card grade-based communication about student learning. What's happening there is that those students are aspiring to mastery of different learning targets. And the only way to communicate effectively about that is to communicate about the targets they're hitting or not hitting. To somehow try to map them on the same scale using the same symbol from a communication point of view makes no sense. The only way that it's possible to retain, we're doing every year here in Portland, we do a winter grading conference, and I'm doing actually a breakout session this year that I've not done before, entitled, "Have Report Card Grades Outlived Their Usefulness?" What report card grades represent are the information technology masterpieces of the 1950s. What they allowed us to do was to pack lots of information into a single symbol and thus manage that information with. In our information age, we don't need that anymore. We got much better information processing technology that will allow us to communicate specifically about how each student is doing with regard to the mastery of each of the essential standards that we hold as important for them. Nowhere is that more crucial than in special education. The only way I can think of that you can communicate effectively in the scenario that you're spelling out, Bonnie, is by saying this is a grade of A, and here's what this grade refers to. And have that reference be part of the report, but different for those different students. To try to make to communicate with the symbol alone dooms you to ineffective communication. The only way to keep it is to say this is an A and this is what this A means, and it's different from what this A means. Or we can just forget about the A and just say, here are the learning targets that this student has mastered, and they're different from this student and this student. We know students learn at different rates. The question is, are we willing to accommodate that or not in our assessment and our communication? Well, you're accommodating it. The letter grade thing is what tangles you up. So if you must do that, just make sure that you communicate the meaning of the A, not just the A, to those who need that information. Is that clear? Is that clear?
That's actually very clear and really helps me out a lot with it. Thank you very much.
Okay. Good. Okay. What's up? What's next?
I see Lynn over here's got a question.
Hi.
Yeah. Hi.
In moving towards standards-based grading, and this is actually the first year that I've had to report scores on a scale of 1, 2, 3, 4, standards-based system, that works with standards-based. And I've been using that sort of scale for extended response sort of questions for a while now. This is the first year I've had to use that sort of scale to score something that might be a selected response. So in terms of, say, if you have a standard and you have a certain number of selected response questions that you're using to find out if the student is meeting the standard, like how many should they get right? Is it a percentage game? How do you score selected response on a standards-based scale?
I have no idea. And furthermore, I think the universal reliance on that kind of a scale makes no sense. Because it doesn't allow us to communicate the very detail that you're going to have about a student's level of achievement from that assessment. I expect that your selective response assessment may be reflective of maybe several learning targets at the same time. That would be very efficient, and the result would be information about how each student did in mastering each of those standards, and to somehow map that on some kind of a universal scale. I've not understood that strategy from the time it started being used. I have not.
So speaking of, if you have, say, maybe 10 selected response questions that all address the same standard, and the students do some and not others, like when do you call it good enough that they met the standard? Is that independent?
That's okay. Regardless, for setting the standard scale thing aside, the decision about mastery in a context like that is very much a matter of professional judgment. Now, here's what I would prefer I want to make sure that if you're going to do it alone, you're a competent master of that standard yourself. When you can anticipate with a high degree of confidence how a student would do if you gave them one more item, then if you anticipate that they would get it right, then it's go ahead and make the decision at that level of response, 8, 9, I don't care. But what I'd prefer is for you to pool your judgment about that with other qualified professionals, so that what you're pooling is your collective wisdom, and then you set the cutoff score. And whatever you decide based on your professional wisdom is fine with me. We're not talking about science here. We're not talking about the science of measurement methodology. We're talking about the art of classroom assessment in which your professional judgment needs to be brought to bear here and respected. I just would like that if that professional judgment could be gauged along with that of other similarly qualified teachers in your world, and then you just set it and make sure the students know it from the beginning of the instruction, not from the beginning of the assessment, from the beginning of instruction, so that they're completely familiar with what the rules of the game are, and then go ahead. I think you'll be fine. I respect your judgment in that regard.
Yeah. Yep. Sarah has a question back here in the back.
Hello. During your introduction, you spoke about evaluating the assessment literacy in our school districts. So I was hoping that you could help us better understand how to evaluate and assess the assessment training that's happening currently in our districts. You said to start with the survey, but I'm really wondering what comes after that, because there's a fear that assessment training is happening, but that it's disjointed across my district.
You know, it's a matter of how much power you need to bring to bear here to get things organized around a good foundation of assessment literacy, around that development. You know, the survey that you guys are using is one option. I have a brief test, a 35-item test of assessment literacy, which people could take. I can send Jeff a copy of it, and then, well, Jeff, you may already have it.
Yeah, we're going to.
If not, I'll send.
We're going to. I do have it, Rick. We're going to use that and hand that out this week or right now.
Right. Okay. So you can actually test people's knowledge of good assessment practice. Do that. And then, if depending on, and I can pretty well anticipate the results, but depending on the results, then it may be that there are some people who really do feel as though, and justifiably so, that they're assessment literate, and that'd be fine. I'd be fine with that if there's evidence from such an assessment. If you need to bring more power to bear, ask a sample of teachers to provide copies of their assessments for your evaluation according to the rubrics of quality that characterize the keys to quality that we're talking about here. You're going to have a pretty high level of assessment literacy when you finish with what you're doing there. Ask a few of them to submit samples of their assessments, and you evaluate their assessment literacy and give them the assessment quality and give them feedback on it. The first level then is to do a survey of knowledge, or it can be self-reflection on their current level of assessment literacy. The second level of power is to get some sort of results. The third level of power is to say, starting next year, the assessments of any member of the faculty, of all members of the faculty, will be expected to meet these standards of quality. You get a year to get ready to do that, but next year there's going to be a systematic evaluation of a lot of assessments, and they better be of high quality. You know, that's like the big guns. So I like the idea of starting with the most gentle level of power, do an assessment and see what the results say. The second one is get some sample assessments and see what the results say. The third is to say, Okay, y'all are on your own now. We're going to test the quality of your assessments next year. If you think you're pretty good at it, that's great. Rely on that. If you're not, don't think you're pretty good at it, let's get into some professional development, because next year you're going to be held accountable for the quality of your assessment. Those are the options. You can decide how far you want to go with that.
Great, thank you.
You bet.
Rick, I've been looking at the handout. One of the things I included in the Chapter 6 were some of the surveys, the short surveys you had. Would you talk a little about how you would recommend those surveys be used, and how what you did to determine what went into those surveys? The ones that are at the end of defensible teacher evaluation, the student.
Hang on.
The way I see school.
The way I see school surveys.
Yes, I see. Actually, Jim Popham and I developed those because of our interest to people that, in some concrete terms, that student affect can be clearly defined and can be clearly assessed, and the results could be interesting in terms of instructional decision making. And so we simply identified three or four among a wide variety of options, aspects of the instruction that we wanted to use as the illustration. They aren't the only possibilities. There are lots of other possibilities, but so they're merely intended to give teachers, as we can design them, to give teachers an opportunity to tap some of the affect of the students in their classroom. That having been said, one of the things that I hold actually in the defensible book, the teacher evaluation book, is that as we think about and measure student growth, achievement is number one, no question about it. But what about student affect as an outcome of my instructional intervention? What if, for example, I have a group of students who, think special education, Bonnie, for example. What if I have a group of students who have flat given up on themselves, and I institute some interventions, and lo and behold, at the end of the year or some period later, time later, they've regained their confidence, they're on winning streaks, and they're rolling. I think I've accomplished something of great worth there. And so in my evaluation of the efficacy of my instruction, I'd sure as hell want to report that to my supervisor too, if I had compelling evidence. And I say in the book, I think that ought to be legitimate. That ought to be a legitimate factor if it's relevant. If, for example, if me as a teacher, if I face challenges in that regard and I overcome those challenges, I think I ought to get credit for that. But in order for that to work, what would have to happen, according to the plan I map out in the book, is that my supervisor and I would need to agree in advance that that's a priority, a sufficient priority, that we could do that as one of my key outcomes. I think we're in contact with people face unique instructional situations, because hopelessness always trumps intimidation for getting kids to learn or not learn. And I'm a proponent of hope. I just am.
As I've watched this video and participated in the classroom as well, I am struck by the fact that the essential target that we talk about is assessment literacy. And it's important that we continually go back to that topic of assessment literacy and not take it for granted. We've worked very hard here to establish ways to assess and look at the competencies which go into assessment literacy for teachers, especially, since they are going to be the ones who are going to be the closest to the students.
However, it's also important, and I think a point that Rick makes repeatedly, that leadership, both building and at a central office level, also take ownership for having assessment literacy and being able to provide processes and structures that support assessment literacy for their teachers as well within their organizations. Why is assessment literacy so important? To answer that question, I think we have to really take into account the influence it has on student learning. And that's really what it's all about. You know, irregardless of what policies are made or what mandates come down, we are a learning organization. And so our purpose is to really think about what has the most impact on student learning. And we know having assessment literate teachers and leaders will positively impact student learning.
And another way that I think about it is that Rick has made a case, and we have been really witnesses and experienced it ourselves as teachers, that once students become part of the assessment processes, things change, and there is a transformative role that occurs there as students start to understand not only what they're doing in school, but what it is they're capable of doing. And the idea of student involvement is really one of those core ideas that really goes beyond the idea of policy and beyond the idea of laws. It's good practice, and it's what we would like to advocate for.
Another thing I wanted to point out is that Rick makes mention of a Phi Delta Kappan article entitled Building Assessment Literacy Beyond that I encourage you to read and to share with those within your school and district organization and policymakers as well.
We'll leave you with the idea that it's important to know and be able to talk about assessment and assessment literacy to a broader audience, to our parents, to our school boards, and to our community. And in this way, we're really advocating for a deeper understanding of what the purpose of our educational system is, and the ways that we can take the most advantage of some of the best and the most worthwhile ideas that can make a difference.